Chapter 13. Hey, look who made it. Gabe, the tall, goateed fireman Melody had met only a few times, called when they stepped up the deck steps on Thursday. He held his hand out to Blaine, who shook it. Nice y'all could make it. Thanks for inviting us, Blaine said. He was in his swim trunks and a light t-shirt, which was great for the sticky weather of the day. For a solid week, it had been hot, unbearably hot, in fact, even for the summer months. Melody could feel her hair gluing to her neck each second she was out in it. She felt like a barnacle on a boat, walking behind Blaine, who seemed far more in place than she felt. "And who do we have here?" Gabe asked, gazing at Dylan. "This is my brother, Dylan." Blaine pulled the child in front of him. "This is Gabe. He's a fireman." Dylan's eyes went wide. "In a real fire truck?" Gabe laughed. "Yep, in a real fire truck." "Cool." The admiration from the child was obvious. Picking up the drink from the deck railing, Gabe took a quick sip. "I think the others are inside." He stepped back over to the grill that was sizzling and popping on the far side of the deck. "Unless you want to help me cook." Blaine looked at him for a moment. "I think I'll go grab something to drink first." The smile Gabe had was teasing and understanding. Smart man. Dreading going into that house with everything in her, Melody followed the two of them. It was unbelievable how incredibly hard it was just to breathe. Although it was a beautiful day, blue skies, just the right amount of breeze blowing off the lake, the fact that she might in fact suffocate was never far from her mind. At the door, Blaine opened it for her. As gentlemanly as that should have seemed, it felt more like he was feeding her to the lions. She clutched her purse and her duffel bag and stepped in front of him. "Hey, they're here," Eve said, as though their appearance was akin to the royal couple arriving. She dropped the tongs of the salad she was tossing and went over to them. The closer she got, the less Melody was breathing until her head was pounding with a lack of oxygen. "We're so glad you came." Eve hugged first Blaine, and then Melody, who arched one arm under the one Eve offered. There was nothing especially affectionate about the hug, pretense more than anything else. Then Eve stepped back and bent down to Dylan. "Wow, aren't you a handsome one?" Eve reached out and straightened the child's collar. Melody wanted to knock her across the room, but she stifled the desire. "You look so much like your big brother." It was then that Melody felt the little body hovering closer and closer to her. She smiled and bent down to him. "Dylan, this is Eve, Blaine's friend." So she wasn't as gracious as she should have been. She felt like she deserved at least an E for effort. "Can you tell her hi?" "Hi." The syllable was anything but loud. Where are the others?" Blaine asked, surveying the empty kitchen. "Oh, the guys went into town to get some more barbecue sauce." Blaine nodded. "Then I think I'll just head out and help Gabe." Eve shrugged. "Suit yourself." He turned and started out the door. "Oh, Melody, Blaine, I didn't hear you come in." Lisa strode in the other side of the room, if it could be called striding. 8 months pregnant, it was more like waddling. "And now I'm going out," Blaine said. He looked at Dylan. "You going with me or staying with Mel?" The child considered. Then his hand came up into Melody's. "I'll stay." She smiled down at him. How could she not? She looked up at Blaine. "Go on, we'll be fine." He took her at her word and left. Once he was gone, however, she questioned whether she could, in fact, pull this off. Eve had gone back to the salad, and Melody felt more out of place than before. However, at that moment, a little boy with curly black hair toddled in. "Wow," Melody said. "Is that Alex?" She forgot her need to remain aloof from the situation. "He's adorable." When she walked over, Dylan followed, drawn by the chubby toddler with the slobbery hands. Melody sat down on the tile floor next to the smaller boy. "Oh, you are precious. I can't believe how much you've grown." She pulled Dylan around her and sat him on her lap. "Dylan, this is Alex." "Hi, Alex." Dylan held out his hand, but the child just stared at him. "There are some toys in the living room," Lisa said, "if you want to go in there. We brought some blocks and some trains." "Cool." That was all Dylan needed. "Come on, Alex." With not much more coaxing, they were gone. It took effort for Melody to pull herself off the floor. Ugh. She brushed her jean shorts off. "Man, I am not as young as I used to be." "Tell me about it," Lisa said. "I wouldn't even attempt that anymore." Melody smiled. "Well, yeah, but you have an excuse." "Some excuse. I'm starting to feel like a beached whale. I can hardly get out of chairs anymore." She put some bologna in a bowl and scooped a heap of noodles with it. "Remind me again that this is worth it." Melody fell into the dream world Lisa was living. "Worth it? How can you even ask that? You've got the cutest little guy on the planet and another one on the way." She reached over and snagged a carrot off the vegetable tray. "I'd call that seriously worth it." From the other side of the room, Ashley strode in. She always looked wholesome. Not so much runway ready, more house mom of the year ready. Only at that moment did Melody question it that she'd never even heard her or Gabe talk about their kids. A thought slid through her. Lisa and Jeff always brought Alex on these outings. Seeing that it was somehow Ashley and Gabe's place, wasn't it curious that they didn't bring their own kids? Unless... "The reinforcements have arrived," AJ called as he and Jeff strode in from the front entryway. Then his gaze snagged out in the living room. "Who's the kid?" Melody wanted to crawl under the table, and she physically shrank back against the cabinet. "That's Blaine's brother, Dylan," Eve said, and there was a strain to her voice. "I told you they were bringing him." "Oh." AJ's gaze slid over to Melody and held. "Yeah, I forgot." His normal buoyancy disappeared into sullenness. "Hey, Mel." "Hey." She wrapped her arms over her middle, wishing they hadn't bothered to come. A thick fog of awkwardness descended on the kitchen. "Well, we'll just get this barbecue sauce out to Gabe," Jeff said, sidling up to Lisa for a touch and a small kiss. His gaze fell to the bowl, and he looked at it skeptically. "Looks wonderful. I think I'll stick to the steak." "Ha ha," she laughed with no mirth as she angled her nose up to him. He pecked the bridge of her nose, turned, and flipped the sauce bottle in the air. "Are the beans and potato salad ready?" Ashley opened one pan and then another. "Yep, let us know when the meat is." The two of them went out the back door onto the deck, and Melody let out a breath of relief, hoping Blaine would stay on his best behavior. "No, seriously," Gabe said as he sat on the lawn chair next to the one Blaine occupied. The clouds drifted lazily by as the popping and sizzling steak continued its hunger-inducing performance on the grill. "The Astros have a real shot at the pennant this year. The Padres are fading, and if Rivers can keep pitching like he has been, they'll be strong down the stretch." "That's true, but Hampton's out for the season, and that guy they pulled up from AAA is just barely holding on." Never had Blaine been so thankful for the two lunkheads who worked in the casual men's department right next to him. It wasn't that he didn't like baseball, but he didn't have time to follow it like they did. Every day it was a play-by-play of the previous day's game, or the game just prior to that if the Astros hadn't played since then. But it was nice to be armed with some information to sound minimally intelligent now. "Oh, now there's trouble," Jeff said, coming out the door and tossing the bottle to Gabe, who barely caught it. Jeff put out his hand. "Hey, Blaine, how's it going?" "Not too shabby." Blaine stood and shook the older man's hand. "How about yourself?" "More of the same, except I got moved up to driver last week." "Really? Congrats. One of Houston's finest and all of that." Blaine tipped the bottle of beer he'd been holding up, feeling the comparison with his own life next to theirs. It was not a comparison he fared well in at all. With everything in him, he wanted to spin some wonderful story about going to the Caribbean or Cozumel earlier in the summer, but he beat that thought back. What had Melody said about peacocks? Well, sometimes it wasn't the females, but the males a guy was trying to impress with that stuff. His gaze snagged on the guy standing with no smile at all behind Jeff. Pulling in the animosity, Blaine reached around Jeff to AJ. "AJ." Looking like he might either throw up or pitch Blaine off the dock, AJ shook his hand. "Blaine?" There was a long moment after that in which no one really said anything. Finally, Blaine took a long drink of his beer that attacked his head with its chill. Bottle in hand, Gabe stepped over to the grill and opened the hood. Flames shot up, licking through and around the meat resting on the racks. "Whoa, careful there," Blaine said. "We might have to call the fire department." "Yeah, there would be a fun situation," Jeff said, retrieving a beer from the cooler. "I'd love to see Gabe explaining to the captain how he'd managed to torch his own deck." "It wouldn't be the first boneheaded thing someone around here has done," Gabe shot back as he tamed the flames with a pistol-grip bottle of water. "Hey, you watch it there." Jeff pointed the beer he'd just opened at his friend. "Those stories go both ways, you know." Gabe nodded. "And therefore I will be shutting up now." Jeff tipped his bottle and nodded. Smart man. The door behind them swung open. "Are you guys ever going to get that meat done?" Ashley came out holding the biggest bowl of potato salad Blaine had ever seen. "If Gabe isn't careful, we'll be having charcoal for lunch," Jeff said. "And you won't be eating at all if you don't watch it." Gabe opened the barbecue bottle and licked his fingers when it went everywhere. "Do we have the brush somewhere?" Up in the cabinet, I think," Ashley said. "I'll get it," Jeff said, and Blaine wondered if he was simply smart enough to extract himself from a horribly awkward situation. What to look at, what to say, Gabe seemed safe, so he ambled that way. He leaned on the railing. "I guess we're boating again this year?" "Of course. You going again?" "You got it. I haven't been water skiing since last year." "Really?" Gabe pinned him with a strange look. "I figured you went water skiing every weekend, the way you looked last year." There was more to that statement, but before he had a chance to ask, Jeff returned followed by a gaggle of women and children. They poured out of the house, a mass of voices and laughter. Blaine picked Melody out without really trying. She was smiling, but he couldn't tell how much of that was real and how much was an act. She was far too good at the acting thing. He watched her, holding Alex and trailing behind Dylan. She would make a really good mother someday. He shook his head at that thought. When his gaze caught Eve, following Melody, his heart and gaze fell. Although Melody had a smile, Eve looked like she was about to cry. It didn't take Einstein to know why. As he watched the scene, AJ went to his wife and put his hand on her back. They exchanged the barest of tired, sad smiles with each other, and then melted quietly back into the merriment. Blaine's heart hurt for them, and for the first time, looking at AJ, the animosity fell away. With everything in him, he wanted to tell Melody, who was now seated at the picnic table with Alex on her lap and Dylan at her side. She gave Alex his sipper cup, and her gaze went over to Blaine. Her smile was in her eyes as much as on her lips, and he knew then that it wasn't an act. She really was genuinely happy. That lifted his own heart, even from the quiet sadness that was only steps away from her. "Who's hungry?" Gabe asked, arching the platter into the air with the meat sizzling on top of it. "Who's not by now?" Ashley asked. "You are the slowest cook in the universe." Gabe walked over to her, set the meat on the picnic table, and swept her into a kiss. "I may be the slowest, but I'm also the best looking." Ashley laughed as he planted a serious one on her. "I thought we brought Dylan's cap in," Melody said, rummaging through their stuff on the little guest bed. Each had changed, and now all were making final preparations for some time in the sun. "I don't see it in this bag anywhere." "It's probably in the car," Blaine said, watching her. She really had become much more like a mother in the last month. "I'll run out and get it." "'Kay." She set about roping and twisting her hair up into a ponytail as she retook her position at the mirror on the dresser. "The keys are in my purse on the couch or the kitchen, one of the two." With an annoyed look, she fanned her fingers out as strands of hair fell to the floor. "Jeez." "Got it. Come on, Dylan." He started out with his brother. However, he had seen her, and the questions attacked him. His heart dove into the turmoil of why she was losing her hair and how he could be happy being with Melody while he knew Eve's heart was breaking. There were no good answers for any of it. At the couch, he picked up Mel's white purse. It was nothing special, not Prada or Gucci, just quintessential Melody, practical and unassuming. Without really thinking about it, he unzipped the top and started his search. However, the first thing his fingers met up with caused him to stop dead. He lifted the silver-lined package out as the question went through his head. His gaze slid across the words, and the tenuous happiness he'd been clinging to fell into utter fear. Slim and thin, diet and weight loss supplements. The middle of his heart fell to his shoes as life spun away from him. "Ah, Mel, what are you—" He barely whispered the words and then swallowed even them when he heard the voices approaching. "I don't think she was feeling good," Lisa said. "She was so quiet at lunch. I hope there's nothing wrong." It was Ashley, and she sounded worried. "Well, I know they've been trying, so maybe she has a reason to be sick." As one, they broke into the living room and Lisa pulled up short. "Oh, Blaine, I didn't know you were in here." Quickly, he stuffed the package back into the purse and dug out the keys without seeing them. "Not for long. We were headed out to the lake, but we seem to have lost Dylan's cap." Across the room, Lisa sat down in the rocking chair and pulled Alex up to her. "Well, y'all have fun. Keep those guys under control for us." "There's a tall order," Blaine said, trying to make a joke. But it hurt. "No kidding," Ashley agreed, sitting in the wing-backed chair, pulling a magazine out. "You're not going?" he asked, feeling like he shouldn't just leave. Ashley shook her head. "Nope, I've been on a boat with Gabe. Too much for my nerves." Blaine laughed and then hurried out with Dylan to get the cap. Sure enough, the silver SUV was nowhere to be seen. His heart fell further. He wished he could call them, ask, find out how she was, but that would never happen. So he quickly went to the little white car. Concerns pressed down from every direction, and he had no idea what to do about any of them. The soft white swimsuit she'd bought on Saturday was more snug than she wanted it to be. Somehow, Melody had convinced herself that by now she would have lost enough to make it fit a little better. She pulled the straps forward, trying to get it to stop digging into her shoulder blades, but it was hopeless. This plateau was worse than the last. The truth was, she had finally resorted to pills last week. It wasn't great, but how else was she supposed to get down to her goal weight? Eating nothing and exercising obviously wasn't working. She was proud of herself for not succumbing to the temptation of throwing up. It was ever present, but so far she'd vowed she would not do that again. Pulling the elastic around the back of her leg down, she took a side view in the mirror. Disgust with herself crowded over her. Next to Eve, she was going to look like a walrus. If only there was a way to get out of going. But Dylan wanted to, and he had vowed not to go if she didn't. Stuck and knowing it, she grabbed her sunscreen and plastered a smile on her face. What other choice did she have? How he would ever not look like death warmed over, Blaine had no idea. When Melody walked out of the house to meet them on the deck, it was all he could do not to flip out at the risks she was taking with her health. She had to know the dangers of not eating and taking diet pills on top of it. But thinking back, what had she eaten for lunch? Not much. His gaze slid down her frame, and he shook his head in disgust that she would think there was anything wrong with her. Somehow, he had to tell her that. But at the moment, they were being joined by the Bobbsey twins. Serious conversation of any sort would have to wait. "Wow, look at you, Mel," Gabe said, appraising her. "Nice suit." "Thanks." She seemed to squirm under the attention. "You guys ready?" Gabe asked. "Guess so," Blaine said, sincerely trying to sound excited, but falling far, far short of that. He stood with Dylan as he sensed Melody taking a head count. Where are AJ and Eve?" she asked, anchoring her arms around herself. "They took off," Jeff said. "Eve wasn't feeling great." Blaine had to think that must be going around. He didn't feel so great either, and even Melody didn't look like she felt all that great anymore. Pushing everything else down, he stepped over to her. Carefully, he leaned closer. "It'll be fun, I promise." Her eyes questioned that, but she tried to smile. The heat of the day, the sticky air, and her perpetual headache were not boding well for a marvelous day on the lake. Add to that the slight nausea, and Melody wondered if there was something rotten in the potato salad. There was no reason for Eve to get sick. It probably had to do with the two of them showing up. AJ certainly hadn't looked at all pleased. Not that he ever did these days. Melody seriously considered begging off going on the water. She certainly had enough reasons to use, but the guys looked so happy and excited. How could she worry them? Plus, Dylan was only being brave because she was. She couldn't disappoint him. Watch your step. Blaine took her hand and helped her onto the boat. The rocking motion swarmed over her. Fighting to keep her balance, she grabbed the first seat and fell into it. This was going to be a study in acting like she had never performed. The whole afternoon, Blaine kept watch over her. Every so often he would see her sway slightly, and he wondered again about the pills. Each of the guys took their turns on the skis. Melody wouldn't even consider it, and Blaine let it go quickly. The last thing he wanted was her out on skis, not physically well. As the day slid into late day, he watched again as she brushed her hair back and flicked the strands that came out into the water. He noticed without trying to how grass-like the hair across her hairline was. It didn't look healthy at all, and although she'd been in the sunlight all day, her face had a slightly gray hue to it. The more he looked, the more unnerved he became. "Do you want to go out again?" Jeff asked Blaine from the front. "Oh, I don't know, I'm kind of tired." He was liking having his arm around her, being able to soak up the sun together. Besides, it was almost possible from this proximity to believe he could do something to protect her. "Tired? Did that word just come out of his mouth?" Gabe asked, tooling the boat around the lake slowly. "I thought he was Superman." "False advertising," Jeff said, shaking his head with a laugh. Blaine sighed and pulled himself forward. "Fine, just so you don't think I can't outski both of you with my eyes closed." He felt Melody look up at him, and when he looked down at her, there was a soft pride in her eyes. It drilled into the middle of his soul. She knew everything about him, the good, the bad, and the really ugly. And yet she still looked at him like that. How that was possible? He had no idea. "Don't have too much fun without me." He leaned down and laid his lips on hers. Pulling his hand up, lest she have any questions who he was hot-dogging to impress this time, he laid it on her soft neck. She laughed softly, and he could hear the embarrassment. When he pulled back, he was only inches from her. "Don't go anywhere." She laughed again. Blaine flipped the skis out, jumped in the almost warm water, and swam around, getting ready. When he got in position, one look took in Melody, her arm around Dylan's waist as they watched him, and his heart slid through his chest. The understanding that these were the types of experiences he'd always wanted to give Dylan but never had the resources cracked over him. He had to rake the breath over the swelling of his heart. Because of her, that kid was getting to see a life he'd never imagined he would ever be living, and so, Blaine realized, was he. Picking his hand up, he waved. Gabe turned to drive, the motor accelerated, and with one jerk, Blaine was up and flying across the water. The wind whipped at him as he hopped one wave and headed for the other side of the boat. He waved to her, and both she and Dylan waved back. Their smiles were priceless. Maybe next year they could come again. Maybe by then, things would be very different for all of them. Where that thought came from, he had no idea, but as he tested it in his heart, he knew it to be true. This day would prove to be the turning point for all their lives. He was sure of it. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.